situation on the ground is finely balanced in that we have seen during the course of this year the initiative at the strategic to tactical level moving back to Russia. And as I've said before, this is mostly because of the things Russia has been doing and partly because of the things the West has not been doing. They saw off the Ukrainian offensive in the autumn of last year, and they remain very confident that they are not going to lose territory. It's beyond the reach of the Ukrainian military at the minute. And they also saw, in the short term, this wobble in the US and to some degree in Europe about the provision of support to Ukraine, partly because some people argue that that this war can't be won, and it's unreasonable to keep fueling up Ukraine to fight a war with its people if it can't be won. So, and the difference is Western support, so stop and settle. And that's not a view that Ukraine broadly shares. But what Russia has done is really three big things. It's found more people. So it doesn't have a problem. It's recruiting to about 85% of its targets. And essentially it's taking a lot of Eastern Russians, the Asiatic Russians, and paying them a lot of money to fight, a lot more money than they get for whatever they do in the Eastern Russia. So they can find people. They need equipment, and they're solving that by refurbishing an awful lot of old stuff. And they have sheds of ancient Soviet equipment. So they are refurbishing that and getting it to the front. And that stock runs out at some point mid-ish of next year. So they know they've got a window of opportunity. And then they have dialed up their defense industry to make more stuff, particularly more missiles and more artillery ammunition. And they've got stuff from their friends, so drones from Iran and missiles, and lots of artillery ammunition from North Korea. And on the Ukrainian side, Ukraine had two big problems, neither of which are fully solved. One is they had a very tired army, even if it's 800,000 strong, because they've been in the front line for 2 years. And as we said before, the average age 43, they're a bit weary. And they've been wrestling with the fact they've run out of volunteers, and so they have to conscript. And that's a hard thing to do, and much harder when you're Ukraine with the oldest population in the world. So they are having to go, I'm going to use this word deliberately, to their breeding stock, their 20-somethings, and order them to fight. And you can see in their latest campaign, they're trying to sweeten the pill by the fact that, choose your own adventure. Well, everyone would choose to sit in Kyiv flying a drone. Not many will choose to be in a trench in the Donbass in the face of a Russian onslaught. So they're short of people, but they've passed a legislation, but they are now in a race to get enough people to keep the army able to cover the ground and fight. And then secondly, they are absolutely still short of ammunition and equipment. So the delay on the American aid, with the long stop being the American election and Putin's bet that if Mr. Trump wins, then the tap will be turned off and it's game over. The European Union gave 50 billion, but it's not military aid, so it's still important, euros. But nations, including Germany, are giving a lot of stuff. But no European effort could make up for that 60 billion of American military aid, which is mostly buying ammunition and weapons from American factories. So it's military Keynesian, really. But in there is 1.3 million artillery rounds and HIMARS rockets. And so the reason the front line is so brittle is, on the one hand, you have a Ukrainian military that's a bit weary and only able to fire perhaps 2,000 artillery rounds a day, not the 7,000 that they would like to. So they're rationing their ammunition. And coming at them are ever larger Russian forces. And the Russian forces are coming in it's a blend of two interesting, it's almost like a blend of two armies. There's a professional army, so trained, equipped, and experienced, and then an awful lot of people who have had very little training, but they've got a helmet and a rifle, and they're basically pointed at the enemy. And they mix those things up to create mass, so they can absorb casualties and they don't care. But enough of them will make it to the Ukrainian trench line. But then the two key advantages have been in artillery ammunition, because they can fire 5 times as many now. And if the USA doesn't turn up, it'll be 10 times as many by the autumn. So that's a crushing weight of fire. And then they've done things like take stocks of old bombs, which basically dumb bombs, and fit them with guidance packs, which have a range of about 40 kilometers. So in some cases, 2,000 kilos of bomb is arriving on a Ukrainian trench. And the Ukrainian has 2 further problems. First, it doesn't have the air defense to shoot down Russian aircraft that are going to bomb it, because the air defense is all over the cities and the power stations. And secondly, it is inhibited by the West, with the exception now of the UK, on firing into Russia.
Yeah.
And one of the crucial advantages in the Battle of Kharkiv is the Russian forces are forming up about 40 kilometers from Kharkiv in Russia. So they were able to organize themselves, concentrate mass in safety, because Ukraine could see them but wasn't allowed to fire at them. So the distances are really short. And we know what the Russian strategy is, which is to break the Ukrainian military, to separate it from Western support. That's about the supply of arms and equipment. To eject the government or remove the government in Kyiv and replace it with a Russian supporter. To occupy the oblast that it claims to have annexed. And crucially in there is obviously Crimea and the land bridge through Mariupol. And its stretch objective is Kharkiv. And its stretch objective is Odessa still, which isolates the Ukrainian economy and essentially cripples it, in terms of its functioning logistics. So Putin has smelt weakness in Ukraine. He has smelt vacillation in the West. He's pretty confident that Trump's going to win, and then that's a decisive play on turning off support. And he has dialed up for a summer offensive. We are seeing the first moves in that. So there was the pressure in the Donbass, so taking territory slowly in the east, in a way the Ukrainians can't stop until they get more ammunition. Then secondly, the assault in Kharkiv, which could be for one of a number of reasons. It might be because they really think they can get there. And it was once the capital of Ukraine. It's a big prize. But secondly, Ukraine can't afford to lose Kharkiv, so it's going to have to shift ammunition and reserve as it has to protect Kharkiv. That weakens the Donbass. The NATO analysis has tended to be that the Russian machinery, whilst bigger, is not good enough to break a competent Ukrainian defense. There's a lot of effort going into that. And as you know, if you're on the defense, you should be able to see off an attacker that's 3 to 5 times bigger than you are, if you're well prepared and you've got enough ammunition and you're resilient enough. Whereas when Ukraine goes on the fence, the ratio goes back the other way, which is why the counteroffensive is so difficult. So NATO quite confidently believes that Russia will not break through, that it will take more territory, but it won't break the Ukrainian line, and it won't get to Kyiv, and it won't take Kharkiv. And then that Russia will have shot its bolt by next year, when that stock of equipment has been used, and a lot of people have become casualties. I mean, it's taking 800 casualties a day, killed, wounded, and missing. That's a huge number. And that all NATO, all the West is just keep supplying Ukraine while Ukraine finds more people to fight. Come back to that. And the supply of military aid ramps up. In particular, that Europe picks up the slack if the US walks away. For all that it is still not the most likely outcome, it is the most dangerous outcome, that Russian forces have cracked through the Ukrainian defense and they are moving towards the Dnieper River or turning back up to Kyiv. And when that happens, Ukraine won't have much left in the locker. And at that on the day that happens, they will demand a no-fly zone, which, however you choose to dress it up, it still means NATO goes to war with Russia. You're shooting down Russian airplanes over Russia. Lashing out happens in a number of ways. So we recognize that this confrontation with Russia isn't just military; it touches all levers of power. So it includes sanctions, including sanctions on Russia oil and gas, which have not been particularly successful. Russia is operating 70% of Russia's civil air traffic is being operated with Boeing and Airbus aircraft, which they were meant to have given back. Yeah, so these are profoundly important issues. But then, of course, there's cyber and organized crime and proxies. So there's a whole range of tools that are in play every single day now, and linked to Ukraine, where Russia can try to upset and destabilize the West. And as you know, its targets are U.S. and European politics. So the U.S. election will be subject to Russian manipulation where they can. You saw that recently in the way Russia spent apparently $20 million or so feeding lines to those Republican congressmen that were in the way of the $60 billion. And that would have been the best $20 billion they'd have ever spent if they succeeded, compared to the massive, massive billions that go with fighting a war. So if Russia were to break through the Ukrainian armed forces, you have Russian forces that are moving westward through Ukraine, and Ukraine can't stop them. So that poses big questions about the viability of Ukraine as a functioning state, whether they get into Kyiv or not, whether they get into Kharkiv or not. It looks like they're being undone. Now, when that happens, Ukraine says to the West, well, this has happened because you didn't support us. They're not entirely wrong. And the fight is coming your way. So one option is we simply watch Ukraine. We say, we're not going to risk it. We watch Ukraine go under. That's going to have terrible consequences for the influence of the West for the next generation, if that happens. So then that makes people reach for the easier measures, and the one that always comes up is a no-fly zone. And a no-fly zone means is that Russian aircraft can't fly within the zone, however you define it, nor Russian missiles go through that airspace. So you can't just say, well, this is a no-fly zone. You have to enforce it. And to enforce it, you would have to be able of shooting down ballistic and cruise missiles that come from Russia and are heading for Ukraine, and to shoot down aircraft that are releasing those missiles. That is an act of war. You just can't. It's not one of those things you could be half pregnant about. You're doing this, and those are the consequences. And then because the no-fly zone is about what happens in the sky, if you were Poland, Hungary, I guess Bulgaria, maybe not Hungary so much, but definitely Poland, you will worry about, well, where does this Russian occupation stop? Are they going to close up to the Polish border? And they might want a buffer zone. So they'll mobilize their armed forces. And when they do that, they'll want at least an article. I would think they'd want an Article 5 discussion, which has only ever happened once, and that was after 9/11 when America called it, which was, to my mind, a slightly odd thing to do. But NATO is then going to have to gear up to deter Russia from going into NATO. But the grey area there, which is where President Macron is so on point, is at that point, does NATO decide to go into Ukraine to say enough is enough? And every time that spectre arises, within an hour, President Putin generally raises the question of tactical nuclear weapons, which is a bluff, but a bluff nobody wants to call. And if you look at if you look at big examples in history, so in about July 1914, the New York Times wrote something along the lines of, does anyone seriously think there was ever going to be a big war in Europe? And a month later, you had the first war. And that's because you get ahead of steam, and events spiral in a way that actually you end up fighting, even though you know it was a daft outcome.